Chapter 13. Thursday, midday, 24th of October. Take a card, Matt Wainwright said, knowing he needed to keep practicing. Any card, any one you like. Don't let me see it. Then, with a flick of his hand, he fanned the entire deck out, presenting them to Bobby Bogle, one of his fellow officers in the Blue Watch at Worthing Fire Station. Remember it, okay? Bogle nodded. Now, put it back. Bogle slipped it back. Instantly, Wainwright flicked the fan out cards back into a neat stack. All right. Now tap the top of the deck for me, will you? Bogle tapped the top of the deck. Moments later, a card jumped out of the pack, flipped over a couple of times, and landed on the floor, face down. Wait, don't touch it. Tell us which card you took out, Bobby. The Queen of Hearts. Turn it over. He leaned forward and turned the card over. It was 3 of clubs. All 10 of the 5 officers in the room laughed. Guess you screwed up, Matt. Darren Wickens, the Blue Watch, Amanda said. Oh, yes. Unless you're brain dead, Bobby. Yeah. Choose the Queen of Hearts. That's 3 of clubs, in case you're blind. Another roar of laughter. Tap the deck again, Bobby, Matt said. Bobby Bogle obliged. Another card jumped out of the pack and flipped over, again landing face down. Turn it over. Bobby Bogle reached down, then held the card up for them all to see. It was a jack of spades. You're so full of shit, Matt, another colleague said. Got any more tricks? Heard another. Do that one you did last week. All we had to remember 3 of them. Wainwright said nothing for some moments. Then he turned to Bobby Bogle. What do you have in your pocket? Cigarettes? Anything else? Bogle patted his breast pocket. Yeah, my wallet. Open it. Careful, someone shouted. Watch the mouse fly out. There was a roar of laughter. Bobby Bogle pulled out his wallet and held it up. Tell us the time, Bobby, the magician said. Bogle looked at his wrist. Shit, where's my fucking watch? Can you describe it? It's a Casio with a brown leather strap. Matt Wainwright held up his wrist. He was wearing a Casio with brown strap. May this be it? Bobby Bogle glared at it, hating to be made a fool of. Now, Bobby, look inside your wallet. Tell me what you see. Bogle pulled out a playing card and looked astonished. It was the Queen of Hearts. Shit, he said. Bloody hell. How did you do that, Matt? If I tell you, I'll have to kill you. Moments later, the siren went off. 3 lights flashed up on the wall above them. One light signaled one appliance was required for something small, such as a vehicle on fire. 2 required both duty crews. 3 meant the reserve appliance was also required. That only happened for major incidents. The reserve was manned by volunteers who lived and worked within 4 minutes drive or bike ride of the station. All of them instantly slept to their feet, hurried out of the mess deck, past the sofas and armchairs, and the rarely used snooker table in the recreation room. The watch commander, who had gone first, opened the door to the pole hatch. Then in turn they slid down into the muster room and ran out to the huge garage where the fire engines, the big red toolbox as they called them, sat. At the start of the shift they had each placed their uniforms and boots at their allotted station outside the vehicles, their boots tucked into their trousers legs like children. Less than 1 minute and 15 seconds after the alarm had first sounded, all of them except the drivers, because they could not drive in boots, had changed into their firefighting kit. The garage door slid upwards, and the first 2 engines, blue lights strobing, silence wailing, pulled out onto the forecourt, and then as the traffic stopped for them out onto the road. Chapter 14. Thursday afternoon, 24th of October. Shall we start upstairs? Red said, as brightly as she could. She'd been feeling terrible all day. The young couple nodded in unison. I love these houses, Red continued as she led the way. The Edwardens knew how to build solid homes that would last, and Portland Avenue is such a lovely street. Which are the local schools? Asked the heavily pregnant woman as they reached the landing. Well, the new Church Road area is really well served, Mrs. Hovey. There are several schools, including Deep Dean, a private nursery school, and at St. Christopher's, just 5 minutes walk away, which is also private and has a terrific reputation. Her husband peered around with dubious expression. Rather a small landing, Sam, he said. Ah, yes, Red replied. The thing is, the architect clearly felt the size of the virgins was more important. I'll begin with the smallest. She pushed open the door and waited for them both to enter. It would make the most perfect room for your baby, don't you think? It was pleasant, with a south aspect into the side wall of the neighbouring house. It would, the pregnant woman exclaimed. Delightful. Not much light, her husband said. He was a good-looking man, dressed in a nice suit. His wife was pretty and sparky. Red felt a pang of envy as she saw them hold hands, evidently much in love. They'd sold their flat and were cash buyers, and this was within their price range. She could see them setting up home here in the semi-detached three-bedroom house just north of New Church Road, a quiet residential area of the city that was close to the sea and within walking distance of a large shopping area. She could see them pushing the buggy around these streets. She could happily live in a house like this herself. Up until yesterday, she could have imagined living here with Carl and being pregnant with his child. How amazing might that have been? Her parents hadn't met Carl, but she knew they would have really liked him. Her mother, a life coach, was an astute judge of people. She had disliked Bryce from the get-go, but back then Red had been totally smitten with him, and all her mother's words of warning had fallen on deaf ears. She and her mother had fallen out big time over Bryce, and later he had blamed her parents for being behind their breakup. It wasn't until her mother had showed her the evidence that she had finally been forced to realize the truth, that everything about Bryce was a lie. She had been a lot more careful with Carl, surreptitiously checking out his background, which had made her feel sneaky but safe. Now this is a really nice sized spare bedroom with its own ensuite bathroom, she said, saving the stunning master bedroom, one of the property's best selling points until now. She held the door open. Yes, Mrs. DeHovey said, your parents would be happy with this room when they come to stay, her husband said, promising Red thought. Then she led them through them across the landing to the peace lot of resistance. She opened the master bedroom door, waited until they had entered and were absorbed in looking around, then tapped the Sky News app on her phone, hopefully desperately forlorn for some news of Carl. Wow, Mrs. Hovey said. You're right, this is a stunning room. The bathroom is a bit disappointing, her husband said. We could change it, darling. It's a fabulous bedroom. Red wasn't listening. She was staring at the news, unable to take her eyes off the screen. Chapter 15, Thursday, late afternoon, 24th of October. The charred body lying in the ditch of the Haywoods Heath Golf Club looked even more eerie under the glare of the spotlights. If that were possible, though, thought Glenn Branson. He was standing with D.S. Bellamoy, who Roy Grace had dispatched from the major crime team to join him. Both of them were feeling cold in the chilly autumn air beneath the screens that had been erected at Able Home Office pathologist Dr. Fraser Theobald, who was conveniently in the area for another postmortem to view the body in situ. Although it looked very much like suicide, foul play had to be ruled out. A little earlier, it had to do with an irate club secretary, James Burker, who felt the police were being over the top in closing down the entire golf club and demanded to know when his members could resume playing. He had been extremely unhappy when Glenn had told him, apologetically, that it would depend on whether or not the pathologist was satisfied that there was no foul play. If he was not satisfied, it meant he could be several days before this part of the golf course at least could reopen. In an attempt to mollify him and mask his irritation, Glenn Branson had asked the secretary how he would feel if this man was a member of his family. Would he not want the police to do everything possible to find the perpetrator and not take the risks of golfers trampling a vital piece of evidence into the ground? Under the harsh lights, the corpse seemed even more like a prop from a horror movie, and despite all this experience, Glenn found himself having to remember that this was him being someone's son, and more than likely someone's loved one. As the pathologist worked his painstaking, thorough, methodically slow way around the body, Glenn tentatively put an arm around Bella's shoulder. You had to be so careful in the police in this new politically correct age. One false move and you could find yourself in a disciplinary charge of sexual harassment. He fancied Bella like hell, although his wife Ari had died only a couple of months ago. They had been living apart for over a year, and before her sudden death following a bicycle accident, she had started divorce proceedings. Even beneath the blue hood of the crime scene protective oversuit, Bella looked attractive. In her mid-30s, she was not conventionally beautiful, but she had something about her face and her good figure. And Glenn believed that if she would allow him to organise a total makeover, as he had once done with Roy Grace, she would really blossom. There was one fly in the ointment, however. It seemed that at the moment she was dating one of his colleagues, Detective Sergeant Norman Potting. It was hard to understand what she could see in a 4 times divorced, shabby, balding, pipe-smoking male chauvinist in his mid-50s, and Glenn was determined to make a play for her. He felt her respond a little to the pressures from his right arm as she moved closer, snuggling against him. "I'm so cold," she said, "and starving. Can't offer you any pork scratching, I'm afraid." She shuddered. "Yuck." "Thanks, Glenn." Suddenly her phone rang. She answered, and Glenn strained to hear the voice of the caller, but wasn't able to. As Bella stepped away, her whole demeanour changed. Her face was alive, animated. "I'm just attending a rural suicide with Glenn. Call you later, depending what time we get finished." Glenn watched the pathologist take a ruler measurement on the upper part of the victim's right leg. It never ceased to amaze him quite how different all the pathologists he worked with were. Short, tubby and jolly, slender and beautiful, tall and cylindrical, wiry and deadly serious. This particular one, Dr. Fraser Theobald, was a short, stockily built man in his mid-50s with bold, beady, nut brown eyes. He sported a thick Adolf Hitler-style moustache beneath a massive hood of a nose and an untidy, threadbare thatch of wiry hair on his head. It was Roy Grace who had first mentioned it, and he totally agreed. Theobald would not have needed much more than a larger cigar in his mouth to have gone to a fancy dress party as a possible Groucho Marx. After Bella had hung up, Glenn gave her a quizzical look, but she deliberately avoided eye contact. "Glenn," she said, "if you need to go home, don't worry, I can stay on." "I'm okay," he said. "What about your kids?" "Our sister is babysitting. They adore her. It's all cool." Then she looked at him tenderly. "Are you okay? Are you? It must have been terrible for you, your wife." She was interrupted by his phone ringing. "Len Branson," he answered. It was quiet, methodical. Ray Packham from the high-tech crime unit, who had stayed late in his office with another colleague to work on the charred phone that had been recovered from the victim. "We got lucky, Glenn," he said with the phone. "If it had been an iPhone, which was encrypted, it would have been stuffed, but this one's Galaxy S11, and we're able to read the chip off the main board. We still work on it, but I thought it might be helpful to you to know that someone has called his number several times in the past 24 hours. Do you have the caller's number?" Sounding very pleasant with himself, Packham said, "I do." Chapter 16. Thursday evening, 24th of October. There was a cool blast of air in the downstairs room of Cleo's townhouse, where Roy Grace sat around the makeshift card table with his poker buddies. Like some of the others, he had a cigar smouldering in the ashtray beside him. He checked the 2 cards in front of him, and an ace of diamonds and a 9 of clubs. As Sean MacDonald, a recently retired public order specialist constable, dealt the flop. The Queen of Hearts, Ace of Clubs, and 9 of Spades, 2 pairs, Ace on 9s. This was potentially a good hand. A pile of gambling chips lay in the centre of the table. Alongside each of the 6 players were tumblers of whiskey or glasses of wine, piles of cash and chips, and a couple of overflowing ashtrays surrounded by fragments of crisps and nuts. There was a fog of smoke in the room, which the draught from the open window was helping to clear. Cleo was upstairs working on her Open University philosophy degree with Noah sleep. His door shut against the cigar fumes up in his bedroom. Grace stared ruefully at his diminished piles of chips. He was too distracted to focus tonight, but with a hand like this he had to play. He tended to put down 2 1-pound chips. Bob Thornton, to his left, a long-time retired DI in his mid-70s, was by a wild margin the oldest of the group of regular players. They took it in turns to host an evening every Thursday week, in and out, year in, year out. The game had been going on long before Grace had joined the force. Bob was a frequent winner and true to form. There was a mountain of chips and cash in front of the man right now. Grace watched Bob hunch his shoulders as he checked his 2 whole cards, keeping them close to his chest, peering at them through his glasses with alert, greedy eyes. He opened and shut his mouth, flicked his tongue along his lips in serpent-like manner. Grace, who reckoned he could read the man's body language, knew immediately he didn't have to worry about Bob's hand unless he got lucky on either of the 2 next cards, the turn and the river. But to his surprise, Bob Thornton matched his 2 pounds and raised him 3. Grace eyed the rest of his companions. Gary Blaisdell, wearing a sweatshirt over a t-shirt, was a 34-year-old detective in Brighton CID. He had a serious, narrow face beneath short curly hair. He was peering at his cards impassively. Next to Gary sat Chris Croak, a motorcycle cop in the road policing unit, with lean and wiry good looks, short blonde hair, blue eyes, and a quick fire charm. Croak was a consummate ladies' man who, thanks to having married a wealthy woman, seemed to live the lifestyle more of a playboy than of a cop. He was a reckless, unpredictable gambler, and in 7 years of playing with him, Grace found his body language hard to decipher. He never seemed to care whether he won or lost. It was much easier to read people who had something at stake. Croak now doubled the ante by raising a full £5. Grace turned his focus on Frank Newton, a quiet, balding man who worked in IT at Brighton Police Station. He rarely bluffed, rarely raised, and as a result rarely finished any evening up. Newton's giveaway was a nervous twitch of his right eye, the surefire signal that he had a strong hand. It was twitching now, but then suddenly he shook his head. I'm out. It was back around to Grace. He either had to raise his bet or drop out. He had 2 pairs and there was 2 more cards to come. No other aces or nines were showing. He tossed in a further £8. Then his mind went back to the suicide note, which he had photographed on his phone and now knew by heart and could not stop thinking about. He had dealt with his share of suicides over the years, as well as 2 homicides in the past that had been set up to look like suicides. The pattern for every suicide was different, and who the hell knew what truly went on in the mind of someone who about to take that terrible step. From the little he knew about the victim so far, he was a well-liked and respected family GP. Dr. Carl Murphy had gone to play in a golf tournament and had played well. His sister had collected his 2 small sons from school and had been waiting for her brother to return. He had confided to her that he had a date that night and was excited and had a babysitter arranged. The mindset of someone on the verge of suicide. Another card had appeared face up on the table. The 3 of clubs. No sodding use at all to him, he thought. He looked again at the 4 cards on the table. With his hidden ace and hidden nines, he was still in reasonable shape. There was a total bag of nails in terms of numbers and suits on the table, so it was unlike anyone was holding a run or a flush in their hand. He pushed a £5 chip forward. Then, as he sank back into his slots, his phone rang. Looking at the display, he saw it was Glenn Branson. Stepping away apologetically from the table, he answered, "Sorry to wake you up, old timer." Very witty. "Our suicide victim at Hayward Heath, yeah? Tell me, Fraser Theobald Cacafor. With suicide at stage, but he'll know more tomorrow after the post-mortem. Is he suspicious? No. He needs to do a post-mortem before he can be certain. Okay, where are you? Still on the golf course. I've been working on my handicap. Yes, too fucking funny. It's bloody brass monkeys out here. Roy, someone called out. Are you in? Grace ended the call and returned to the table and saw the final cut. The revolver was lying face up. It was the 9 of hearts, and suddenly his adrenaline was surging. With his concealed ace and 9, he now had a full house. 9 on aces. He looked at the 5 open cards carefully, thinking hard. There was virtually nothing that could beat him. From what was showing, the only possible higher full house was if someone had 2 aces as their whole cards. He looked at his fellow players and raised the bet to £10. Bob Thornton, tongue flicking again, raised to £30. Everyone else folded. Grace studied the old detectives for some moments. He was bluffing, he was sure. He matched his bet and raised him by £30. Thornton moved a further £30 of chips forward. See you, he said. Grace flipped up his 2 whole cards triumphantly, but his triumph was short-lived. Thornton flipped his card to reveal a pair of queens. Full house, he said. Queens on 10s. Grace grimaced as Thornton scooped the pot over towards his already massive pile of chips. Thornton grinned at him, then flipped his tongue mischievously. Bastard! Grace thought, realizing he had been outsmarted. The candy sod had worked out somehow that Roy had picked up on his little getaway and just now used it against him. At the moment, Cleo appeared. Supper's ready. How's everyone doing? Chapter 17. Thursday evening, 24th of October. Red sat in front of her television with a glass of wine in her hand, mesmerized by the images of the blazing restaurant Cuba Libre on the edge of Brighton's Lane, and deeply dismayed. It was her favourite restaurant in the city, and it was where in happy times Bryce had taken her on their first date. It was a big, airy interior with a great bar, comfortable sofa, and a terrific menu. Carl, by coincidence, had also taken her there on her first solo date. On the screen, she watched a helicopter circling above the building. A reporter standing in the road, mic in her hand and surrounded by strobing blue lights, was shouting to the camera that the blaze, which had begun in the kitchen, was now out of control. Red drained her glass, refilled it, and though she was making an effort to quit smoking to please Carl, she lit her third cigarette of the evening. Then her doorbell rang. Please God, big Carl. She ran over to the intercom and stared at the tiny black and white video screen. Her heart sank. She saw two uniformed police officers. She pressed the police speak button. Hello, Miss Red Westwood, the female officer said. This is Sergeant Nelson and PC Spofford from Success Police. I'm sorry to trouble you so late. Is it possible to have a word? Red's heart was pounding. Constable Spofford had been to see her on many of the occasions she'd called the police when Bryce was being violent to her, and she had met Sergeant Nelson before too. It was 10:30 p.m. Her nerves had been shot to hell after being with Bryce some months ago at the suggestion of her friend Red Curl, who had read about the charity in Argus. She had turned for governess to the sanctuary scheme. On the day she had finally plucked up the courage to throw Bryce out, they had arranged the securing of the front door and windows and the installation of a spy hole in the door. They had recommended she make a formal report to the police and press charges, but she hadn't wanted to do that and risk angering Bryce further. Despite these precautions, she had still been concerned, which was why she had moved to temporary accommodation in this flat in the hopes that he would not be able to find her. She walked out into the hall past her expensive special size road bike, which she kept business inside her flat after having had the previous one stolen. She had a second bike for getting around town, which she referred to as her shit bike, padlocked down in the hallway. If that one got stolen, it wouldn't matter too much. Come on up. She pressed the buzzer, peered through the spy hole because she could never be totally sure who might be out on the landing, then removed the safety chain, turned the key in the two deadlocks, and opened the reinforced front door. The stairwell light came on. She heard footsteps. Moments later, she saw the familiar uniform figure of Bob Spofford, his tall, trim frame almost dwarfing the petite figure of uniformed Sergeant Karen Nelson following behind him. She had wavy fair hair that bounced down. She took off her hat, and despite her composed demeanour, she had a distinct presence of authority about her. Red thought that no one sensible would want to mess with. Her colleague had a friendly face beneath close cropped dark hair that made him look much younger than his 29 years and gave him the air of a listener. And boy, Red thought, had he listened on the frequent visits he had paid her, responding to her 999 calls and then checking up on her during the days and weeks that followed to ensure she was okay. She had talked and he had listened and offered his wisdom. She liked him enormously, and he seemed wise beyond his years. Red invited them in and closed the door behind them, then looked at them anxiously. What's happened? We need to ask you a few questions, Miss Westwood, Sergeant Nelson said. Yes, of course. Would you like a drink? Tea, coffee, a glass of wine? The sergeant shook her head. No, thank you, but perhaps we could sit down. Red led them to the sitting room, grabbed the remote and muted the television. Terrible. That's fire, she said. My wife's favourite restaurant. Constable's staff, Spofford said. Now that we can afford to go there, not that we can afford to go there, except on very special occasions. The three of them stared at the silent images for some moments after they had sat down. It's nice to see you, Bob, Constable Spofford, Red said, wondering if it was inappropriate to use his first name in the front of his superior. Been a few months, he said. All's quiet. Yes, maybe Bryce has moved away or hopefully found someone new. Good, I'm glad to hear it. He looked a tad uneasy. Miss Westwood, Sergeant Nelson said, records we've obtained from the O2 phone company indicate you've made numerous calls to one particular number during the past 24 hours. She gave her the number. Is that correct? Red nodded hesitantly, suddenly feeling sick in the pit of her stomach. Why are you asking? The two police officers glanced at each other in a way that made Red feel extremely uncomfortable. Then the sergeant responded in a bland, impersonal way. The registered owner of this phone is Dr. Carl Murphy. Do you mind if I ask how you know him? The flickering images on the television screen were too distracting. Red grabbed them around and switched the television off. Why? What has he done? Has something happened to him? Can I ask what your relation with Dr. Murphy is? Spofford's phone started ringing. He removed it from his pocket, looked at the display and silenced it, giving his colleague and Red apologetic glances. Well, Going out together, Red replied. Then she shrugged. He was meant to pick me up at 7 o'clock yesterday evening and he never showed up. Why? Has he had an accident? How long have you been seeing each other? She thought for a moment. About 6 weeks. Without being too personal, Miss Westwood, how would you describe your relationship with Dr. Murphy? What is all this about? Red asked, her nerves making her irritable. She looked at Spofford, but only got a blank expression and uncomfortable body language back from him. The sergeant stared sympathetically at her, and for a moment Red thought she was softening. But then she responded with a distancing, formal tone of professional copper. I'm afraid you might have to prepare yourself. We found a body in a strange circumstance that might be Dr. Murphy, and we think you might be able to help us. A body? I'm afraid so, yes. What do you mean, he's dead? We don't have formal identification at this stage, but we're pretty certain it is Dr. Murphy. It's not him, not Carl, Red says empathetically. You've got that wrong. What makes you think it could be him? Did you have any kind of falling out with him? The sergeant answered, shook her head. Absolutely not. Far from it. I thought that we were. Her voice trailed off. Karen Nelson looked at her expectantly. After some moments, she prompted, you thought what? Red shook her head. For one brief moment in my life, I thought that Carl might be different from other men. That's all. Then he stood me up last night. She gulped down some wine, picked up her pack of cigarettes and shook one out. Mind if I smoke? It's your home. Dr. Yes, Nelson said. I love the smell, Spofford said. Please go ahead. Want one? She offered him the pack. I'd love one, but no thanks. Red lit the cigarette. Please tell me what's happened. You said you found a body. Has Carl had an accident? The two police officers exchanged another glance, and that glance told Red all she needed to know. Please tell me something. Tell me what you know. Red pleaded. Has he been in an accident? Shall I tell me at least that? Can we establish that you at least had contact with Dr. Can we establish when you last had contact with Dr. Murphy? Sergeant Nelson replied. The last time I saw him was on Sunday, but we spoke every day, several times a day. I last spoke to him on Tuesday evening. She hesitated. He told me he adored me. Would you say that Dr. Murphy was depressed at all? Depressed? No. Well, let me qualify that. Yes, he told me he had been depressed after his wife died. He told me at one point that he felt suicidal because he loved her so much, but he would never commit suicide, he said, because of their children. He couldn't do that to them. He talked about suicide, the sergeant pressed, and he made a notepad. What exactly did he say? Red shook her head. He didn't talk about it in a serious way. He said it had gone through his mind in the immediate aftermath of her death, but he totally dismissed it. How sure are you of that? That he couldn't kill himself? 100%. He's a bright guy, very positive, and he lives for his children. They are the world to him. She felt engulfed in a dark cloud. Why are you asking me about suicide? I don't want to cause you unnecessary distress, Miss Westwood, Karen Nelson said, but the body had been found. That maybe Dr. Carl Murphy appears to be a suicide victim. We can't be sure at this stage, but the mobile phone recovered from the scene is the one you have been ringing. Red closed eyes. Oh God, no, please don't let it be Carl. Sergeant Nelson raised a hand apologetically. I will give you more information as soon as I can, I promise. Just to confirm, Red, Spofford said, all has been quiet with Bryce Lauren for how long now? Red thought for some moments. Since we split up. She said, oh, okay, good. He made a note in his book. You've heard nothing at all? Not seen him anywhere? Nothing, not at all. Call. And haven't seen him. Well, I thought I might have seen him out some office this morning, but I'm not sure. You were very helpful in bringing all that to an end, and I really appreciate it. You thought you saw him this morning. Despite the exclusion order, he's not now within half a mile of you. Did you report it? No, Red said gloomily. I was 100% sure. I might have imagined it. I went out and couldn't see any sign of him. She shrugged. The two officers stood up and Red showed them to the door. I think you have the wrong person, she said. Carl and I were talking about, the future. He wouldn't have committed suicide. Believe me. Please believe me. You have the wrong person. I'll be in touch as soon as I have more news, Karen Nelson said. P.C. Spofford gave a sympathetic but helpless smile as he followed his colleague out. Red did not respond. She felt numb. She closed and locked the doors carefully. Inside, she was a mess of jelly. Thanks for listening.